Hey guys, we're back here with Avid Outdoorsman. We're going to talk about some of the extra safety rules that go beyond the 4 basics. And these are things that as you get more comfortable around firearms, you'll learn and it'll start to become second nature, and that's a good thing. The first thing we're going to talk about is anytime you pick up a firearm, whether it's a shotgun, a rifle, a carry gun, competition gun, it doesn't matter. You always want to open up the action of the firearm. And the whole reason behind that is you want to make sure it's not loaded. You may not want it to be loaded. If it's a self-defense handgun, you may want to check to make sure it actually is loaded before you put it in your holster. So I've got a Glock 19 here, and you know, this gun's a very simple gun. There's no external safeties on it. Anytime you want to clear this gun, first thing you always want to do is drop the magazine, okay? And what's the reasoning behind that, Katie, dropping the magazine?
Because if you rack it and you just picks up another bullet and puts it back in.
Right, you don't want to chamber around when you're clearing the gun. So I'm going to drop the magazine, and this one doesn't have one in it. I'm going to pull the slide back and lock it to the rear, okay? And again, all this is I need to know how to open the action of this handgun. If I'm not familiar with this gun and don't know how to open the action and check that it's clear, the best thing to do is just leave it alone and let someone, whoever's handgun it is, show you. The next firearm we have here is a Smith & Wesson 640. It's a little carry piece. Again, when you pick up a handgun, you want to know how to open the action. On a double action revolver such as this, there's a button on the side. You push it forward and you simply push out on the cylinder. Now we can visually inspect and make sure there's no ammunition in this firearm as well. Once you have the firearm action opened up, you want to ensure that it is in fact clear of ammunition. We've got a STI double stack magazine here. It's loaded with dummy rounds that are painted orange. They're plastic. I'm going to go ahead and hand that to Katie. Go ahead and lock and load that magazine. Okay, now we have a round in the chamber and we want to clear this gun. So the first thing we're going to do is open the action, and the first thing we have to do before we open the action is what?
Drop the magazine.
We're going to drop the magazine out. Here, I'll take that. Okay. Then she's going to pull the slide back to the rear. The round should come out if there's one in there, and she also locked the slide to the rear as she did that. Why don't you go ahead and talk us through how to inspect the chamber and also to ensure there's no magazine in the firearm.
So to make sure that there's nothing in the chamber or anything, you tilt the gun down at a downward angle like this and look into the chamber and make sure there's nothing in there. Also, you want to tilt it up like this a little bit to make sure there's no magazine in there. If it's dark and you can't see there, and to make sure there's no magazine, you want to stick your hand up in here, and if you can stick your hand in there, then there's nothing in there. But don't stick it in here because it might hurt your finger. Come
back with a nub, yeah. Right? It doesn't feel good. No. Okay, go ahead and lock that back. Now, we also have an AR-15 here, and again, anytime you pick it up, you want to open the action up to make sure that this thing is in fact unloaded. So to do that, we're going to simply pull the charging handle back, which brings the bolt back to the rear, and there's a lock on the side, and it locks the action back. Now I can check to make sure the chamber's empty, I can make sure there's no magazine in there, and we're good to go. On a shotgun, this is a semi-automatic Benelli M2. It has a button here that releases a shell if there were shells in it. It also will lock the bolt to the rear when I pull the bolt back. So again, once that is locked back to the rear, I can check the tube to make sure it's empty. I can check the chamber to make sure it's empty, and we have a clear gun. Okay, the last couple things we're going to talk about as far as firearm safety is once you get the gun empty, cleared, and you know it's a safe gun, we want to inspect the barrel to make sure it's free from obstructions. Now, if you go to a gun safety course, a hunter safety course, a lot of times they'll talk about if you fall down and stick your barrel in the ground, it can get clogged up with mud, and that's part of it. But also, for anybody that reloads and sometimes even factory ammunition, you can get what's called a squib load, and what that means is there's not enough powder in the casing to send the bullet all the way out of the barrel, and it'll lock up halfway down the barrel, and if you fire a follow-on shot, your gun can blow up, and it's a pretty bad deal. When the gun blows up, the chamber of the barrel blows out, the magazine blows out the bottom, your hands are going to sting real bad, so it's a pretty bad deal. I've actually had some squib loads before with factory ammunition and my personal reloads, and luckily never blew a gun up yet, but you always want to make sure, and to do that, obviously you can either take the gun apart or you can stick a rod, a cleaning rod or something similar down the barrel to make sure there's nothing in there. If you're shooting your gun and you feel it recoil differently than it normally would, that's probably a good time to stop and check that. It generally means there wasn't enough powder in the casing, and your recoil will feel a lot less than it normally would be. And then you can just run a rod up the barrel, make sure everything's kosher in there and there's nothing in there, and then enjoy the rest of the time. The next thing you want to check to make sure is that the ammunition that you're buying is correct for your firearm. This is a 357 Magnum. It will shoot 38 specials, okay, with no problems. If you take a 38 pistol and shoot 357s through it, you can actually blow the firearm up. The frames aren't strong enough to handle that Magnum round. It's the same thing with a 44 Magnum. You can shoot 44 specials through it, but you can't shoot 44 Magnum through a 44 special. When you buy a 9mm, there are so many types. 9mm labeled so many different ways. There's 9mm NATO, there's 9mm Luger, there's 9x19. Those are all the same bullet, but they may be labeled different on boxes, and they will fit a 9mm firearm. They also have 9x21, which will not fit in this firearm. They also have a 9mm Kurz, which is German for 9mm short, which we call a 380 in the United States. So depending on what type of ammunition you're buying, your gun may say 9mm Kurz and it's actually a 380, and you try to shoot 9mm through it and it won't work. So definitely be careful. Make sure you buy the right ammunition for your firearm. Make sure that your firearm is rated for the type of ammunition you're shooting. And again, you don't want to blow your gun up. They're very expensive, and they're sometimes hard to replace.